I'm glad that you mentioned spiritual warfare and also contraception because you have this really interesting chapter in your book where you talk about assaults on marriage outside of the church. And
Mhm,
you identify three particular attacks. One is pornography,
mhm,
one is the rejection of fatherhood, and one is feminism. Now,
mhm,
there might be some Catholics listening to this who would think, absolutely, I see where you're coming from on pornography.
mhm,
Absolutely, it's a problem that our society has largely rejected the importance of fatherhood. But
mhm,
feminism, John, there's this perception out there that feminism is the righteous fight for equality for women,
mhm,
to be able to attain a position in society equal to men. Isn't feminism good? Um, but I'd really like to hear you talk about the goals of feminism, and also, if the goal of feminism was to lift all women up, shouldn't we also see a lifting up of marriage? Could you just sort of speak to what some of your research uncovered about the harms created by feminism?
right. So I look at it like this. And by the way, I guess I should preface this with I have five daughters. Um, I have a mom, Mary Kay Clark, who runs Seton Home Study School. I think they've had about 80,000 students with that. I think that's probably the most successful or one of the most successful educational institutions in the history of Christendom. And again, she's essentially started the company, has been running this, done a great job. My point of that is not to say that. Well, let me say it like this: the sort of feminism I'm speaking about in the book is, and again, the word itself is a little bit, it's ambiguous because you and I could use the word feminism in a way that like it's completely consistent with everything the teachings of the church. Um, the problem with what I say radical feminism is you go back to the Betty Friedan's of the world, and I mentioned the names and what they were talking about. As feminism, as radical feminism pertains to what I'm outlining in the book, these are women who say that compare literally domestic life at home for women to a Nazi concentration camp. That's literally the analogy drawn by Betty Friedan. By the way, that analogy is offensive, should be offensive to everyone on earth, not just women. It's offensive to everyone. But the talk of that was more and more and more like if you are at home raising children, you are wasting your life. That's the message. And so in fact, the feminist movement, and I provide a lot of quotes in there, and some of these were pretty eye-opening to me. Like I thought it was bad, but I think it was as bad as it was. Um, abortion is the contraception abortion is a natural outgrowth of that mentality. If you think that your life is a an Auschwitz like environment, the only way out, contraception abortion, and not to get married in the first place. um what's interesting too about the section that I have in there is that I guess I'm of the school that says if you want to be an expert in something, you should have some experience with it. So, like Paul Johnson mentions in his book Intellectuals, that Karl Marx wrote a lot about factories. I mean, I don't know if either of you have had the displeasure of having to read Karl Marx at any length, and I don't recommend it. But I've had to, and he writes a lot about factories, writes a lot about theoretically what he considers capitalism, right? He's the guy. Like, you want to know what factory life is like? Marx is the guy. In fact, in American colleges, Marx is the primary economist they read, right? Like, sure, that makes sense. Okay. Anyway, so he writes a lot about factories. Paul Johnson makes the point that Karl Marx never set foot in a factory in his life, literally. So if he never set foot in a factory in his life, how is he expert at factory life? So you go to Betty Friedan and you look at Gloria Steinem and all the sort of the feminists that really understood what marriage was. Shouldn't you have been married? I mean, I know that Betty Friedan was, but she talks about she argues that her marriage was just terribly awful, and yet even in that case, She uses her marriage as a microcosm of marriage broadly. Like, yeah, this is what home life is like. Well, that might be what your home life is like. It's certainly not what mine is, believe it or not. So people are happy. But that has affected the theology or quasi theology of many tribunalists. That is, those that work on tribunals. They're thinking, wow, how can we not give an annulment here? I mean, after all, I mean, that home life is just it's horrible. And it's just, I mean, that's the problem. And so that still is there. It would be nice if feminism included, uh, you know, like Joan of Arc or Mary Kay Clark, or there are certainly, the work you've done, Kimberly. The fact of the matter is that if we're talking about feminism in that respect, of course. But this is an anti-God, anti-male because you're anti-God philosophy, and we need to recognize that that's there and that that's present at the tribunal level.